Okay. Last time we went as far as looking at error handling in SQL. We looked at two ways in which errors are handled in SQL Server. First of all, we said that errors which occur when you are executing the SQL statements are referred to as exceptions. Okay. There are two broad types of errors that you are likely to encounter as you are dealing with the SQL Server. The first type is the type that consists mainly of syntax errors, which when you type them in the management studio, they are going to be highlighted and you can make corrections. But there are also errors which might occur during the execution of those statements or during runtime. Those are the ones which are referred to as exceptions. And we say that there are two ways in which you can handle them. The first one was to use try catch, where you declare a set of statements after the keyword try, so that if the statements are executed and an error occurs, then SQL Server is going to stop execution at that point and skip to the part which you have created as catch, and it's going to execute whatever statements you have placed in that section. Then the second one was the res error approach, where when an error occurs, a message is produced which can be a notification to the user or can be returned to the program or the application that is making use of your database. And I looked briefly at what those parameters mean. Today, I want to look at the last part, two parts, that is the stored procedures. Then we look at functions. In SQL Server, a stored procedure is a compiled object stored in the database. So there are certain sets of SQL statements that you need to execute repeatedly. Now, instead of just using them as batch, you can store them as stored procedures so that you can access them at any time whenever you need to execute those statements. Again, I did explain what the distinction between stored procedures and batches. We said that that the batches are the temporal set of statements, but the stored procedures are those which are stored as objects and are going to remain part of the database until you drop them. Okay. Okay, so in SQL Server, you can create stored procedures using the create procedure statement. And this is the syntax. You start with the keyword create procedure, followed by the name of the procedure, then as, then the begin keyword is the starting point of the body of the procedure. And that's why you can put a number of statements that you need to execute. Once you have created that procedure, then it's going to be stored as part of your database. And if you need to run those statements which you have defined as a stored procedure, you can use this statement. Either you use exec, which is the short form of execute, or you use the full word execute followed by the name of the procedure. We have some procedures which are installed when we install SQL Server. Those are system procedures, and we have used some of them before. For example, when we are renaming databases, we used stored procedures to rename the database. So today I want to look at how you can create your own stored procedures and use it to perform a number of functions. Before we create the procedures, just a few guidelines on creating stored procedures. You cannot combine the create procedure statement with other SQL statements in a single batch. What I mean is there are certain, for example, you cannot create a procedure and at the same time use the drop procedure statement, okay? So when you are creating a procedure, you have to make sure that it's the only statement in the batch. I hope you remember that what a batch is. Do you remember what a batch is? Anyone who can help us? Gift. Quasi. What's a batch? Okay, we say that a batch is a set of SQL statements, and the batch will end with the word go. Okay, so all the statements above the word go are going to be considered to be part of one batch. Are we together?
So I have a question.
Yes. Please go ahead with your question.
Can I use the headset?
How many statements can one batch affect at once?
Sorry, come again?
How many statements can one batch affect at once?
Practically, theoretically, there is no limit because a batch is just a loose grouping of SQL statements. Okay, they may not even be related. You can have a create table or create database statement followed by use database, then create table, then select data from a table. All those you can put them together as a batch. So there's no limit in that sense. I don't know if that helps you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So that was the first guideline. The second is that you must have the create procedure permission to create procedure in the database and the author permission on that schema where the procedure is going to be created. Remember, procedures, stored procedures are objects. So you can assign them to specific schema in your database. And the same rules are going to apply to procedures that applies to tables. So for you to create a table, you must have the right permission to create a table. If you are going to alter the table, you must have permission to alter the table. That's why for our demonstrations, we have been logging in as a database administrator, where you have full permission, full rights to do anything on the database. And the last point is you can create a stored procedure only in the current database. So if you are working in AdventureWorks database, you cannot create a stored procedure which is going to be in a different database. You can only create a procedure that is going to be part of the AdventureWorks database.
Hello.
Yes? Is there a question?
No, I encountered a problem with my mic here, so I was just changing the headsets. I was not getting anything, but I heard the question.
Are you now able to get me?
Yes,
okay.
I can get you, sir.
Okay. Okay. Apart from creating procedures, you need to be able to manage procedures. Now, managing procedures will involve authoring, that is making adjustments to the procedures or changes to the procedures, as well as deleting where you drop the procedure. And I have the statements, the syntax for both of them. The author procedure, you use the keywords author procedure followed by the procedure that you want to author. And the drop procedure, you use the drop procedure statement. In most cases, you are going to want to create procedures which are going to take in some form of input and return maybe some results, okay? It's not a requirement. A procedure can be one where you just execute it, and it's going to perform the task without you supplying any additional values. But in most cases, you may want to have a procedure where you need to provide some values which are going to be used in the execution. And in other cases, you may want your procedure to produce some results, that is, return results. For example, you may want to have create a procedure where you are going to retrieve names of employees based on a certain department. So when executing the procedure, you need to provide the department name for which you want to view the employees. Now, those procedures where you need to provide values that are going to be used are called parameterized stored procedures. In other words, these procedures are going to require parameters. Parameters are used to pass value to the stored procedures during runtime. What I mean is during execution, for example, you want to rename a database, you want to be able to state which database you want to rename and what the new name should be for that database. So for such parameters, you need to provide parameters, which are going to be, one parameter will be for the current name of the database. The second will be the new name that you want to assign to the database. Parameters in SQL Server might require that you indicate the direction. That is to give an indication whether the parameter is an input parameter or output parameter. By default, if you don't specify, the parameter is going to be treated as an input parameter. What I mean by that is that an input parameter is a variable that is going to contain a value or the literal value that you pass on to the variable that is going to contain the value that you want to be used during execution of the stored procedure. If you want to get results from your stored procedure to produce results, then you need to produce output. And those parameters are referred to as output parameters. Just hold on, just give me a minute, let me check this. Sorry about that. So I was saying, an input parameter is a parameter that is going to be used to pass a value to be used by the stored procedure. An output parameter is one that is going to be used to produce results from the procedure. Okay. So when you're creating parameterized stored procedures, the syntax is similar to what we have come across for procedures. The only difference that after the name of the procedure, you need to provide the name of the parameter followed by the data type. So if you're going to create a new procedure called PRC, list employee, and we are going to have this as a parameter. Now, because we have not specified that it's an output parameter, it means that SQL Server is going to treat this as an input parameter. In other words, the value that is going to be contained in title is going to be used during the execution of the stored procedure. If we need to maybe display some results, we have to include the word output after the name of the parameter. Okay, so I have one example of a stored procedure. This procedure is PRC is just being used to stand for procedure. And as you can see, the name of the procedure has to obey the rules of identifiers. Identifiers in context of programming are simply names of variables or names of procedures or functions. So in general, we refer to them as identifiers. So for identifiers like procedures, you have to the name should not include space. The name will start with a letter, not a digit, and you avoid using certain special symbols, such as question marks, quotation marks, and so on. So to be on the safe side, you use the camel notation. We did look at this some time back. Camel notation is when you give names of identifiers, but if in such a case where the name is consisting of more than one word, the first word is going to be in small letters. Then each of the words making up the name is going to start with a capital letter. So we have capital L and capital E. The idea is the name should be descriptive enough so that when you look at the name of the procedure, you are able to tell what it does, okay? So this one, when you look at it, immediately you'll be able to see that, oh, this procedure is used to list employees. And after that, we have the parameter called title. The parameter will have the same, will be named using the rules for variables. And in SQL Server, we said all variables start with the @ symbol, followed by the name or words that will make up the name of the variable. So in this case, we are going to require one parameter called title, and this parameter is going to be of the data type char, and we have set the maximum or the length to 50. After that, we have the as keyword, then begin. So as you can see from here, this procedure is going to take whatever title you pass to the parameter, and then it's going to display the wage list of employees. Then below that, it's going to to display employee ID and login ID and titles of employees taken from a table called employee in the AdventureWorks database. And the condition is the title of the employees to be displayed is going to be according to the value which was passed on to the procedure. Okay, so let me just switch to my management studio and make some of these examples. Okay. Okay, so I'm in the SQL Server Management Studio, and I'm going to use the AdventureWorks database. So to create the procedure, that's my procedure. So I'll go ahead and execute that. I'm hoping I haven't created it yet. Oh, okay, I've already created this procedure, so I'm getting this message that there is already one. Okay, to just make it different, I'll put the word, I'll say employees. Okay. Okay, so I've created this procedure, and if I go to the database, and I'll find the one that the procedure I've just created listed there. Okay, now for me to be able to get some results, let me just check what kind of titles I have in this database. So I'll just say select. So for titles, I have a number of them like that. So let me take, for example, design engineer. Okay, so I'm going to say name of the procedure. I'll say execute. Then after that, I'll put design. This is text. So I'll say design engineer. So I'm able to retrieve from that database and this table particularly all employees where the title, the job title is design engineer. Okay. So if you come to messages, then you'll be able to see the print statement results there. And that's what we have obtained there. Okay. So that's how you create parameterized stored procedures. If you have more than one parameter, you have to include the parameters in the execute statement. So if I'm going to have more than one, I'll have to list the parameters there, which are going to be used in the stored procedure. Okay, and that's what I have here. You execute parameterized procedures using the statement execute or execute, and followed by the procedure name, then the parameters. And these parameters, if you just have one, you just put the parameter. Like in our case, we just had the value code design engineer. It could be a variable which we have declared and set a value, or it could be a literal. But if we have multiple parameters, then we have to list the parameters and separate them by commas. The order of the parameters that should be the same as in the way you created them. So if I had, after title, there was another parameter, then maybe say last name, at last name voucher 50, then even when executing them, I have to, the first one is going to be the title, and the second parameter is going to be for the first name. And I have an example there. Okay, this example illustrates two things. One, you can use, when executing the stored procedure, you can assign the value by saying the name of the parameter followed by equal sign, then the value that you're assigning. But it's quicker and there's no difference by just stating, in place of the parameter, you put the value that is going to be assigned to that variable or to that parameter. You can also pass a table valued parameter to a stored procedure. And I need, after the break, I'll come and show you an example where we have a stored procedure using a table valued parameter. A table valued parameter is simply a user defined database, so data, which is a table, so that when you declare the variable, you are just defining a table, and that is what is going to be passed on as a variable. So the steps are, first you create the table. If you haven't created a table, then you create a user data type, which is a table, and then you create a procedure that will take the parameter as a table valued user data type. Then you can execute by passing on that table to that procedure, and you should be able to get your results. Okay, my first 40 minutes is up. Okay, so I will see you after the short break of about 5-10 minutes. Then we'll look at the table valued parameters, and then we can look at functions. Unless there's a quick question.